What's good? It's Woog. The Riyadh season card just ended, and I just want to react to some of the results and a lot of the action. Let's get right into it. There's a lot to talk about. Bivol was just awarded a majority decision over Artur Beterbiev. When they were reading the scorecards, I felt so happy for Bivol. I almost felt emotionally for Bivol. Like, it's not that it wasn't a competitive fight. It's not that the first fight was a robbery, but just from a human standpoint, I mean, both of these guys are fighting their butts off. Like, this was such a good fight. Like, would you agree that this was probably better than the first fight? I kind of think that it was. But Bivol, you see what he's going through, I feel like, in the ring. Like, he's got this discipline level, and you wonder, like, is he breaking? Is he starting to wilt? Is Artur Beterbiev really getting to him? Like, after those first 4 or 5 rounds, especially when it got after the 5th and 6th round, because 5th and 6th went super well for Artur Beterbiev. I was telling my brother, I'm like, you know, either Bivol kind of took that round off, or like didn't really exert himself as much as maybe he could have. Either he did that by design, or he really might be in trouble here, because you know that he can't have like big lulls of like inactivity, given how the first fight resulted, right? He looked like he was winning like the first half of most of those rounds. But then you would see the pressure of Artur Beterbiev kind of getting to Bivol, and Bivol stopped throwing punches and doing a lot more moving, to where the judges could see like the last 45 seconds of the round and say, okay, I think Artur Beterbiev might have won that. And so I was seeing that just happen more and more, where you started to see Artur Beterbiev start rolling downhill, again, especially in the 5th and 6th round. But Bivol's response to that in the 7th, the 8th, you might have given, Beterbiev like somewhere, like giving him a round or two somewhere between like the 8th and the 11th. And Beterbiev, I think, won the 12th round for sure, especially with that beautiful right hand, like that cut Bivol. That one like visibly shook Bivol up. That might have been one of the most impactful punches in the fight. But I knew that it was going to come down to the wire. I know that there were like a couple swing rounds, but there were also a few rounds that I don't feel, again, not that they weren't competitive, but I felt like there were a few rounds that were clear rounds, either for Bivol or for Artur Beterbiev. So we at least knew like the framework of what was possible in terms of how this fight could be scored. But I was just hoping that they didn't give all the close swing rounds to Artur Beterbiev, to where this decision resulted in like a draw or something like that. And I was just like, please don't be a draw. Please don't be a draw. Then they started reading the scorecards, and the first of the 3 judges that they read out was a draw. And I'm thinking like, oh God. But then you hear the other 2 scores that were both for one of the 2 fighters. We just don't know which until they announced the name. And when they said the new, both my brother and I just yelled out in a celebratory fashion. We probably yelled like Eddie Hearn yelled. And it's not because we like Bivol more than Artur Beterbiev. It's not that we don't like Artur Beterbiev, none of that. It was just watching the fight play out and kind of seeing the story of the fight take place in the ring. It just felt like Bivol did enough to edge at least 7 of those rounds. So, given the first effort from Bivol in that first fight, and the fact that he had his long-held WBA belt taken from him due to that decision, right? Artur Beterbiev becomes the undisputed champion. Given what we just saw in that second effort from Bivol in this rematch, if he were to walk away from that with like a draw or a loss and basically come home empty-handed, it feels like it would not be right. So to see the decision go his way, it felt pretty damn fulfilling. And I'm glad that what I saw to be, at least just my opinion, what felt like the right decision was made in that fight. Again, I'm not even saying that first fight was a robbery. I'm just saying certain things, judging wise, had to kind of break towards Artur Beterbiev for him to earn that decision. But again, there are close rounds and tough rounds to score. After like the 6th round, I'm thinking like, like, is Bivol breaking? Is he gonna get stopped? And I wonder, just seeing how Artur Beterbiev started to get hit with, he was getting hit a lot, pretty much throughout the fight. Bivol's an extremely accurate puncher, but I felt like Dmitry Bivol started to really stand his ground. First of all, he was moving brilliantly. And whereas in the first fight, in the second half of the first fight, there were moments, especially in the second half of a lot of those rounds, where Dmitry Bivol would be doing the lateral moving, but not enough punching behind it. Whereas in this fight, when Dmitry Bivol was doing the moving, he was punctuating those stop and pops a lot more effectively, and he was fighting a lot stronger in the second half of the fight. So I wonder if those fifth and sixth rounds, if Dmitry Bivol took his foot off the gas just a little bit and let Artur Beterbiev start coming on in the fifth and sixth, to where there was still enough in the tank for Dmitry Bivol to fight the basically rounds 7 through 12 that we saw him fight in this rematch. I don't know if that was by design, but it could have been. I'd really be curious. But you saw Dmitry Bivol not only looking to score points in those moments, he was moving, stop, pop, move, stop, and pop. And he was just beating Artur Beterbiev to the punch in a lot of those exchanges. And you started to see even Beterbiev's body language change a bit from some of those combinations, to where you're wondering, is Dmitry Bivol starting to like noticeably hurt Artur Beterbiev? But yeah, this was, to me, this was as well as you could box against Artur Beterbiev. And you know what, quite frankly, I thought that first fight from Dmitry Bivol was about as well as you could box against somebody as destructive and as persistent, as tenacious as Artur Beterbiev. But yeah, Dmitry Bivol wins the majority decision, and I'm wondering, did age in any way play a part in Artur Beterbiev's performance here in a way that it never has in his career? Did age finally become an issue, or would me even suggesting that take away from the brilliance in the performance that we saw from Dmitry Bivol? So I want to be mindful when I consider whether Artur Beterbiev's age played a part. I don't want to take any of the credit away from Bivol. That was a spectacular performance. And again, I was thinking, like, is that momentum shift that we saw, in the third round, is that going to be a permanent momentum shift to where now it's going to be all Artur Beterbiev going forward, and it's only going to be a matter of when or if he stops Dmitry Bivol versus winning via decision? But no, Dmitry Bivol apparently is damn near unbreakable. I mean, you want to talk about fortitude, you want to talk about sticking to the plan, trusting your preparation, trusting your system, and then executing on that. Brilliant. I mean, in the first fight alone, I was just enamored by how much Dmitry Bivol's hands stayed up to catch a lot of those Artur Beterbiev shots. Not that even him catching it still did damage to Bivol. And obviously, Bivol lost his pound of flesh in this rematch. But man, you can't speak enough about his defense and about his mental toughness throughout this fight. I was really wondering if he was getting discouraged by how things were going by the time we hit the fifth and the sixth round. But then you heard in the post-fight interview, Dmitry Bivol said, after a few rounds, I'm talking with my corner, and I know that even though I'm getting tired, I'm looking at Artur Beterbiev, and he's getting tired too. And that was the truth of the matter. Both of these guys were getting tired. Artur Beterbiev has this reputation of being like this indestructible force and like almost superhuman. But no, at least at 40 years old, at least in this stage, I mean, he is not immune from being tired. He's not immune from having moments of inactivity. And if it's not total inactivity, it's at least him being the least sharp fighter between the two, because that's really what happened. In the second half of the fight, Dmitry Bivol was sharper. He was sharper with his movement, his punch placement, his speed, his timing. He was just a sharper fighter, sharper boxer in the second half of the fight. And really, that's what won him the fight. And he had the better legs. That's all a part of being the sharper fighter. Dmitry Bivol was just ready for this moment. And no, this wasn't a case of Artur Beterbiev slowly breaking Dmitry Bivol. This was Dmitry Bivol ready for that second half of the fight and actually kind of pushing Beterbiev back in a lot of those moments, to where you saw him breaking off those combinations. And again, you saw Beterbiev's body language start to change a bit. So yeah, brilliant performance. We've got a new undisputed champion, and it looks like they're gonna have a third fight. I wouldn't imagine that it's gonna be nearly the same turnaround as this one. I think they're gonna take some time off. I hope they take some time off for their sake. These were two very competitive, very grueling, very tough fights for both guys, regardless of their reputations for punching power or relative lack thereof. This was a very tough 2 fights for both. And you heard Beterbiev after the fight say something about like, I didn't even really want to fight the second fight, but it wasn't my choice. Something like that, if I understood him correctly. I don't know exactly what's going on there, but I thought that Beterbiev's demeanor, I mean, what he said in the interview was mostly praise God, like he always does, but there was like a little bit of, I don't know what he said to Dmitry Bivol when he walked up to him and pointed at him. I don't know if it was one of those, I'm going to be back for those belts or something like that. I don't know what was said, but it seemed like there was at the very least, some level of annoyance coming from Beterbiev. I wasn't sure how to interpret that, but the fight itself, great fight. I personally had the scorecard similarly to how Chris Mannix scored it. I had it about 115 to 113, and the rounds that the way I almost had an identical scorecard to Chris Mannix. The question is, did Artur Beterbiev really win 2 out of the first 4 rounds? I kind of thought maybe Dmitry Bivol won each of the first 3 rounds, and then Beterbiev won 4 through 6. But I could see it, 2-2 after 4. I can understand that as well. But yeah, props to the new undisputed champion. I hope they take some time before running it back in the trilogy fight. But, Artur Beterbiev will be, 41 years old probably by the time they run it back for the 3rd fight. And Dmitry Bivol, I mean, the guy's just, he's going to be ready. And I'm sure both of these guys are going to be as ready as they can be. But, man, I don't know. It's another conversation for another day. This was a great performance from Dmitry Bivol. I thought that he deserved this close decision win. Joseph Parker just knocked out Martin Bakole. Wow. And this was an early knockout too. And it looked like Bakole, when he started to finally pour on some offense, it looked like he was going to be hell on Joseph Parker. We saw those kind of weird angle shots. We saw a couple of them land pretty clearly or come this close to landing perfectly. And it's like, ooh, is Joseph Parker going to be able to handle this type of pressure? Or is this going to look like, another Joe Joyce versus Joseph Parker? And it looked for a moment like it was going to head down the ladder, like that road. And then Joseph Parker uncorks a right hand that kind of just brushes just the top of Martin Bakole's head. It didn't land flush. That wasn't the design of those punches. But, if you watch like a lot of mixed martial arts, sometimes you'll see a head kick look like a damn near miss. Just kind of skinned the top. We could say it kind of gave the opponent a haircut. But then you see the opponent's equilibrium totally thrown off, and he never gets his legs back. It looks like that's what happened with this Joseph Parker right hand. And Joseph Parker landed a big shot just before that. It looked like Martin Bakole put his hands down and basically like shook his head like, yeah, I just ate that and you did nothing to me. And the commentators commented on that. If you were listening to the Mannix, Sergio Mora, Todd Grisham, Sean Porter, if you were listening to that side, they were basically remarking on how Bakole basically took that clean shot and just, basically demonstrated to Joseph Parker, yeah, you can't hurt me. And then like seconds later, Joseph Parker throws that right hand, again, just kind of clips upside Martin Bakole's head. And you saw Bakole kind of delay, kind of buckle forward and then fall back like, whoa. And then he fell hard on his back, barely beat the 10 count. He looked like he was trying to steady himself on the ropes with one of his arms, and then I think it was his corner that threw in the towel. So, you could argue that towel coming in was a little bit premature. It reminded me a little bit of when Ben Davison threw the towel in when Mauricio Lara dropped Lee Wood in their first fight. You could argue that it was an early stoppage, but if you look at Martin Bakole's legs when he got up, just the way that he had to kind of steady himself and the fact that he barely beat the 10 count and then was a little bit wobbly when he got up, he probably wasn't well. And I don't know what this does to his plans to fight Efe Ajagba in May, but Joseph Parker just knocked off the short notice boogeyman in the heavyweight division. So yeah, the Joseph Parker story continues. And I'm nothing against Martin Bakole, but I feel really happy and good for Joseph Parker, mostly because this was supposed to be finally him getting another crack at the title after being a champ like almost like 9 years ago. It had been a long road back to a title shot, and that was just taken from him when Daniel Dubois withdrew from the fight. So it's like exit the champ, enter Martin Bakole, the guy who nobody really seems to want to fight. And if he toppled Joseph Parker, it would be like, oh no, now he'll never get a title shot. But no, Joseph Parker handled business, got the knockout win. So now Joseph Parker, his last 3 wins have been against Deontay Wilder, Zhilei Zhang, and Martin Bakole. So props to Joseph Parker, and I hope that they rebook Daniel Dubois versus Joseph Parker. for Dubois' IBF title. And in terms of picks are concerned, I went with Dimitri Bivol to win a close decision against Beterbiev, and I went with Daniel Dubois to stop Joseph Parker, but then when Martin Bakole entered, I went with Joseph Parker to outbox and to do enough to win a decision, not a knockout, a decision against Martin Bakole. But yeah, Joseph Parker took it several steps further, scores the knockout. Shakur Stevenson, eventually stopped Josh Padley to the body, dropped him several times. It wasn't a super fun fight to watch, but it wasn't a boring fight. It kind of sucks. I feel like I don't like to chatter around, Shakur Stevenson's like fight-by-fight performances. He demonstrates how much better he is, than his opponents. And you can see he's trying to do damage. And Padley is a very tough game fighter, right? So Shakur Stevenson, clearly with a bad left hand. I mean, he was wincing as soon as he heard it. He was wincing several times throughout the fight. You would see him throw the punch, land or barely land, or it get blocked or whatever, and then he winces again. You saw him after the fight when they take the glove off. He was wincing and just like, again. He clearly had a really bad left hand, and he's coming off a right hand surgery. So it looks like this is going to be a thing in Shakur Stevenson's career. Unfortunately, I really hope they get that under control, because Floyd Mayweather famously had issues with his hands throughout the second half of his career, or actually much of his career. I mean, I remember even before the Arturo Gatti, Zab Judah, and Oscar De La Hoya fights for Floyd Mayweather, I remember there was one fight where he hurt both hands in the fight and still won. But yeah, Shakur Stevenson, now he's had injuries to both hands, and I haven't heard his post-fight commentary yet, so I don't know if it was his left hand or it might have been his wrist or something else, but it looks like he's got issues on both sides. So yeah, that's something to keep an eye on going forward. But yeah, he boxed brilliantly as he normally does, and he gets a stoppage here, so at least that's a good look that he got a stoppage, and at least something to kind of excite the fans, because I heard that on X/Twitter that people were kind of ishing on him again and just talking about how boring his fights are and just kind of dumping on him. I mean, it's been going on for a minute, and even in the DAZN commentary, they were kind of talking about his lack of performance. At least a couple of the commentators were. They weren't all. Sometimes somebody would push back on that a little bit. But yeah, Shakur Stevenson got the stoppage win against Joshua Padley. And props to Padley for taking this fight on such short notice. And props to Bakole for taking the fight against Parker on such short notice. Now we get to Carlos Adames fighting a draw with Hamza Shiraz. I thought Hamza Shiraz was going to win, but I thought he was going to win via decision, just because this was a big step-up fight. Carlos Adames is a lot better than Austin Ammo Williams, than Tyler Denny, and then Liam Williams, right? All three guys who recently got stopped by Hamza Shiraz. But I thought that Hamza Shiraz's offense was that good to where he would win a decision against Carlos Adames. I watched that fight, and I thought Carlos Adames deserved the win. Something like 7-5, 8-4. I get that in the first couple of rounds, it looked like Adames was having trouble getting to Hamza Shiraz. But you can't give Hamza Shiraz the round simply for being the taller, longer fighter if he's not landing more effective shots and isn't controlling the action. We saw Carlos Adames pushing the pace. We saw him getting to Hamza Shiraz. We saw Hamza Shiraz's punch output reduced. We saw Hamza Shiraz getting backed up for most of those rounds. And it wasn't one of those by design, I'm moving around because I'm showing ring generalship and I'm in control here. It was one of those, I can't do enough to keep this guy off of me, and I'm just moving so this guy doesn't hit me too hard, and throwing enough to make it look like I'm still getting active and I'm still throwing hard shots. A lot of those hard shots were getting blocked. They were missing entirely, a lot of them. And it did have a few tough rounds to score, but I don't think that a draw was the fair decision here. I thought that Carlos Adames did enough to win the fight. And, I guess the only silver lining in what I saw as being an unfair draw is that Carlos Adames gets to keep his WBC middleweight title. Are they going to run it back? I don't know. There's not a ton going on in the middleweight division. You've got Janabek holding 2 of the belts. You've got Erislandy Lara. Maybe they do a unification between 2 out of those 3 guys. But it's going to be interesting to see how they match make for Hamza Shiraz next. But he didn't get hit hard enough for the chin question to truly be answered. We haven't really seen anybody just continue to blast Hamza Shiraz, but pressure obviously made him look a lot less spectacular than he's looked in his last several fights, basically for most of his career. So yeah, this was a draw that I thought should have gone to Carlos Adames. And then there's Vergil Ortiz defeating Israel Madrimov via unanimous decision. I thought that this was the right call. I actually thought that Madrimov was going to stop Vergil Ortiz Jr., but man, Vergil Ortiz, I think that he outdid himself. I think that this was probably his best performance. And you know, I'm going to stop thinking that Vergil's aggression is going to backfire on him. Like, maybe it will at some point. I'm not saying that it can't happen, but he has underrated defense. And, you know, it's time that we start just acknowledging that out loud. Yes, he did get hit a lot against Bohachuk. Yes, he did get dropped twice. Yes, he did get, you know, he should have gotten dropped against Mean Machine, and he got hurt a couple of times against Mean Machine. But Vergil Ortiz, for all the good punches that Madrimov was throwing, many of which were landing, like you saw Ortiz's face getting marked up throughout the fight, but he kept his hand up, blocking a lot of those kind of weird, angled, almost Gennady Golovkin, Triple G-like overhands, especially with the, you know, the left hand. Ortiz kept the right hand up, catching a lot of those left hand shots that Madrimov continued to launch. And, you know, in the first couple of rounds, it looked like, damn, like Madrimov's kind of putting on a clinic with the movement. Vergil can't really, you know, pin him. He's trying to keep up with him, but he's not quite cutting the ring off. He's starting to follow him, and he just can't get a read on this guy. He can't time him. Plus, Madrimov's throwing dangerous punches when he does stop moving. So he'll move, bop, 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 move. So like the first couple of rounds, it looked like if this thing, you know, continues to go this way, this is going to be Madrimov running away with the decision win, or maybe even stopping Vergil Ortiz. But Vergil just persisted. He kept going to the body. He kept throwing the jab. He kept on letting his hands go every opportunity he could. He kept on playing responsible defense, and his defense largely held throughout the fight. This was a very, very good fight, but Vergil Ortiz, in my view, and in all three of the judges' views, won the fight. Yes, there was one scorecard that was a little bit too lopsided, but yeah, Vergil deserved this one. And again, I think that this is the best performance in his career. This guy is it's just crazy that this fight wasn't even for a title. I mean, it was just a really, really good fight. And I don't know what it does to Madrimov's stock. I mean, we see that, okay, that style of pressure, which, you know, Vergil is one of the more intense fighters, just minute for minute, moment for moment. He is one of the most intense fighters in boxing, and plus just the ferocity that he throws his punches with. He doesn't necessarily load up on everything, but he loads up on a lot, and he's always looking to touch his opponent, if not with a hard, stiff jab, again, just going to the body, and he invested to the body. And there were a few times in this fight that I was wondering, damn, did he just hurt Israel Madrimov? And I think he did hurt Madrimov a few times. You saw Madrimov get backed up into the ropes. You saw his body language change. You saw him kind of take deep breaths and move away from Vergil when Vergil would land something nice. And they both, by the way, landed really nice shots at different times throughout this fight. Vergil just did the more consistent work. He did more. And you know what? Props to the Boxing Wave, because he got it right. Again, I went with Madrimov via stoppage. I thought he was going to stop him in like the middle rounds, although I was privately pulling for Vergil Ortiz Jr. He's just one of my favorite, you know, fighters in the sport, in any division. Ever since I saw his fight against Mauricio Herrera, I'm like, yeah, I'm going to keep an eye on Vergil Ortiz Jr. But Vergil Ortiz did outwork, and he did more than Israel Madrimov, who, you know, started to really let his hands go in the second half of the fight. Like, he was really committing and going back to the well with some of those punches that he was trying to nail Vergil with. But again, Vergil's defense held. He made Madrimov miss with a lot of shots. He, you know, moved his head. He would kind of just do little things like barely change levels, just enough to where the punch would like land against his glove or would miss him entirely. Madrimov, I would be curious to see the punch stats, but Madrimov was not landing nearly as frequently as he would have liked to with those power punches. So yeah, props to Vergil Ortiz Jr. This was a very, very good performance, and I can only hope that his next fight is for one of these titles. If not against Terrence Crawford, if Terrence Crawford fights Canelo, I don't think he's going to be a 154 guy again. I wouldn't be mad at the WBO at some point. It doesn't have to be immediate, but at some point, stripping Terrence Crawford of the WBO title if he doesn't plan to defend it like in the next half a year. And especially if he's going to wait all the way to September to fight Canelo Alvarez or something like that. He shouldn't be holding on to the WBO title that long. So I would either want to see Vergil fight for the vacant WBO title, if that's the case, or to fight one of the champs, if not either Sebastian Fundora or Bakram Murtazaliev. But yeah, Vergil Ortiz, I think he outdid himself in this one. And then we go to, which one is next? Oh, Ajit Kabayel knocking out Zhili Zhang. You know, when I first did a prediction video, which was at the end of a Daniel Dubois versus Joseph Parker video, so I mean, I don't know how many people saw like the last few minutes where I did a short breakdown and prediction of Zhang versus Kabayel. But when I did a live chat, I changed my initial pick. My initial pick was Kabayel via decision. When I did the live chat a couple days later, I changed that to Kabayel via stoppage. And Kabayel stopped Zhili Zhang by punishing him to the body. And Zhili Zhang went down multiple times. And yes, he looked exhausted by the middle rounds. He looked like he was scary. I mean, he dropped Kabayel in this fight. So when he did let his hands go, he was dangerous, as he always is when he's throwing punches. But again, there were big moments of inactivity. Kabayel was working him. He was doing more, beating him to the punch, beating him up top and to the body. You know, by the time this fight ended and he sunk Zhili Zhang, it didn't look too dissimilar from what he did to Makhmudov when he was just blistering, obliterating Arslanbek Makhmudov to the body. So Kabayel, he's a real one in this division. Now he's got back-to-back-to-back wins against Makhmudov, Frank Sanchez, and now stopping Zhili Zhang. Stopped all three of those guys. So yeah, I think that he should be on the short list for getting a title opportunity, depending on what happens in the title picture with, you know, Usyk's belt and then with Daniel Dubois' belt. Again, I think that Daniel Dubois versus Joseph Parker should be rescheduled, but outside of them, I think that the next up should be Ajit Kabayel. I think that he's done enough by now to deserve a shot. So props to him for knocking out Zhili Zhang. Zhang was in all types of distress and pain by the end of that one. You know, Zhang is now like 41 years old, and he's coming off back-to-back losses. No. He beat Deontay Wilder in between his loss to Joseph Parker and his loss to Ajit Kabayel. But, you know, at this age and just the way that he was kind of deconstructed, broken down, outworked, you know, I mean, it's no secret that he tires in most of his fights if the fights go deep. I mean, what's he going to do in the heavyweight division? Like, I'm sure, I mean, he's got the power to stop some of these guys, definitely. Even the power to stop certain top 10 guys on any given night. I just wonder if he wants to and has the desire and appetite to have to beat two more good guys, like good, you know, top 15, top 10, top 15 heavyweights to get a title shot. I just wonder if he's going to want to go through that work at this point. So yeah, props to Ajit Kabayel for that knockout win. And then finally, let's get to arguably, I mean, this might have been the best fight of the night outside of maybe the main event, but it's definitely a top 2, top 3. I don't know. There were a few really good fights, like Vergil versus Madrimov. That was a really good fight. There were a few really good fights, and obviously we got like explosive performances like Joseph Parker's knockout against Bakole. But round for round, Joshua Buatsi versus Callum Smith, where Callum Smith wins the decision. And I think there was one scorecard that was like too wide. But Callum Smith, I thought, deserved to win a competitive, but pretty clear. I thought, not super clear, but kind of clear. Like a draw would not have been a robbery, but I thought that if they were going to give it to one or the other, I thought that Callum Smith was the one who deserved the win. This was just a grueling fight. Look, I didn't know that Callum Smith still had this kind of volume in him. I kind of thought that it was either going to be Joshua Buatsi ultimately outworking Callum Smith and maybe winning a decision. I think that was my pick, Joshua Buatsi via decision. But I said I wouldn't be surprised if Callum Smith like drops or maybe even stops Joshua Buatsi. And you know, in like the 4th through 6th rounds, it looked like it was about to be headed towards a Callum Smith stoppage over Joshua Buatsi. Just the way that he was killing him to the body, then going up top, just looking at Joshua Buatsi's body language and the way he was getting hit so cleanly and the way he would kind of double over with some of those body shots. It was not, in big stretches, it was not going well for Joshua Buatsi, but he dug so deep and he fought his way back in this one, and those last few rounds were just as back and forth as it could get. This was a very, very grueling fight. And again, look, Callum Smith's only lost to 2 guys. He's lost to Canelo and he's lost to Beterbiev, right? But I still didn't know if he had enough to keep up with the pace and the volume of Joshua Buatsi over time. I just didn't know that he had that pace, that volume, that level of inside fighting still, to where you're not even fighting at mid-range, because we know that Callum Smith has a great, mid-range hook, and he also has a laser of a right hand. He could knock you out with either hand. I just didn't know that he could still get in the trenches and fight across 12 rounds against a Joshua Buatsi in the way that he did. So yeah, props to Callum Smith. He pretty much slightly outworked, and I guess you could say outdamaged. I mean, both of these guys took a beating, took a real beating in this one, but I think that he did more and did enough to deserve a close decision win over Joshua Buatsi. So yeah, props to Callum Smith. He ain't done yet, and it's going to be interesting to see how they matchmake for both. Since the titles look like they're going to be held up, right? Because it looks like they're going to probably do a third, Bivol versus Beterbiev, right? Bivol's now the undisputed champion. But since it looks like they're going to run it back for a third time, those belts are going to be tied up. So I wouldn't mind seeing either of these two guys either fight David Benavidez or maybe Anthony Yarde. Maybe one of these two guys, let's say Callum Smith, fight David Benavidez, and then maybe Joshua Buatsi against Anthony Yarde. And I say Benavidez versus Callum Smith, the winner of this one, because Benavidez should be next up for the title. I mean, he's been like next in line for a couple of fights now, and he's just been doing the work. So I would like to see Benavidez versus Callum Smith, especially because both of these guys used to be champion at 168. Benavidez was the WBC champ, and Callum Smith was the WBA champ. When David Benavidez lost his WBC champ title for the second time, and this time it was on the scale, it was Benavidez's former title that they threw in the mix when Canelo fought and challenged Callum Smith for Callum Smith's WBA title. So yeah, I think that since they never did it at 168, I would like to see Benavidez versus Callum Smith at light heavyweight. And again, I wouldn't be mad at Joshua Buatsi versus Anthony Yarde. But yeah, let me know your thoughts on all these fights in the comments. It was so much boxing, and I know I didn't really go too far in depth in any of these, but I wanted to at least touch on all of these fights. But yeah, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.